Hello, you glorious nerds. It's Anna McHugh. I'm spending some time with my favorite mushroom to find. This is called Frost's bolete. Some folks call it the apple bolete. It is edible and zesty, sort of citrusy, and it has this really elaborate shagginess that is sort of yellow gold, and then underneath you have a reddish stem and a dark red undersurface and a dark red cap. This is a mushroom that I like to call the Red-wrinkled Flabbergaster because anytime I see it, it just blows my mind. It is so unique and so beautiful. I am going to show you a mushroom, I keep calling it unique, a mushroom that looks quite similar and also has a similar sort of citrusy flavor profile. That is the Shaggy-stalked bolete. We'll get to that in a moment, but I want to show you the rest of the ID features for this Red-wrinkled Flabbergaster I have. As I mentioned, it is a bolete type mushroom, so it has a porous undersurface. And I am starting to refer to this year, 2024, in Raleigh, North Carolina, as the blazing hot bolete summer, because we had very little rain in June, but then a whole bunch of it in July. You know, we're in the final week of July, and so we've just had this explosion of hot weather loving porous undersurfaced bolete type mushrooms. And as you can see with this Frost's bolete, you have a feature where it turns blue when you damage it. This is very common with a lot of boletes. Sometimes that blue comes in fairly quickly, like this. Sometimes it's very slow, and sometimes it even changes colors. This is just a ginormous, silly mushroom. I don't even know what it is. And that's another thing about boletes, is like, they are difficult, they are amazing. Most of them are edible. Most of them, by the time you get to them, are huge and clunky and full of worms and bugs. But they're just glorious to study. And also, the ones that stain blue are really fun to draw on. So you have this porous undersurface is kind of, I sometimes compare it to almost like the baleen of a whale. But with a lot of species, when you split it open, you can see the bluish sort of oxidization reaction happening right here. So back to our Red-wrinkled Flabbergaster. Exudoporous is the name of the genus that it lives in. If you look at older resources, you will see that it moved from the genus Exudoporous over to a different genus, the buttery boletes, which is Aureoboletus, I think is how you pronounce it. And then it was moved back to Exudoporous. And so, you know, it can be a little confusing because it is one of those mushrooms that was reclassified and then classified back to Exudoporous. The reason it is called that is you have this gorgeous feature called guttation. And it's a little bit faint here because it typically is. So it's this, in the case of this mushroom, a clear yellowish fluid. It's really beautiful and it's really shiny. A lot of these specimens don't have it because by the time they sort of get larger and start to sporulate, you see that they're actually more sort of, you know, a little bit lighter, a little more orangey as opposed to this dark red. Oh, and there's a slightly, yes, there's some of the shininess of the guttation. That's another thing, is like, there's so many mushroom words that are impractical. Like, you can say, this is shaggy, but I really love the word reticulation because it's just fun to say. It's more specific. And it puts me in the mind of elaborate fishnets. I don't know exactly why. Like, it just ties it all. It ties the room together, ties the mushroom together. Speaking of, so I've talked about everything with the identification of this mushroom, save I think what might be my favorite feature, which is the outer rim of these mushrooms often have a little sort of waffly edge, and they're sort of whitish. And I just love that. I think that's where it gets the common name, the apple bolete. Let me see, I had another one that is quite young, and the guttation is off the, yeah, so you can see it's a really abundant accumulation of it here. And just this, you know, gorgeous, like there's just nothing else like this. I'm almost going speechless in this video, so I'm gonna move on. But typically when I find these, when they're younger and their pores are exuding, the exudopores are exuding, they're a little bit sort of sticky and tacky, a little bit, you know, not so much slimy, but tacky. And then by the time they get a little bit older, you have, they're more smooth. If you were to get this wet, you know, it's a little bit on the sticky side, but it's not as shiny. Another thing that you'll notice here is you have this sort of flash of lighter color. That's really common with boletes. Here's another one that I really like, and often that's like in this case, it was an oak leaf that landed on top of it and sort of left this impression. That's another thing about the variability of boletes. Like, this mushroom is so recognizable compared to a lot of other boletes. The you know, sort of start to blend together. This is a smaller version of that giant beware mushroom, and I think this is in the Aureoboletus genus, but I'm gonna move on because I need to study this one and probably get some help because boletes are very difficult. I also I own a bolete specific book by Alan and Arlene Bissett, and it is really indispensable, but also it's a lot to learn, a lot to study. All right, so moving on, I just wanted to show you this one last specimen and this one last sort of view of the reticulation. I'm losing the daylight, so hopefully you're able to see clearly, but it's just this shaggy sort of golden thing. But it is yellow on top and red underneath, but it sort of intergrades, and so it's a little hard to you know, tell the difference. And this is another specimen that has this just like beautiful subtle ring around the perimeter of the cap. Speaking of which, I want to talk about a way more common edible mushroom. It has the same sort of citrusy flavor. This is the Shaggy-stalked bolete. The common name of, or excuse me, the scientific name for this one is Aureoboletus betula. And Aureoboletus, oftentimes the mushrooms in that genus have a really attractive yellow rim. And in the case of Aureoboletus betula, it is just really hard to, like, most boletes are edible. You want to be cautious because, as I mentioned, they're very difficult and very variable. But overall, they're, you know, the vast majority of them are innocuous if they aren't bitter and kind of gross. But this one is really great because you don't have to worry about ambiguity of like it could be this one thing or could be another. Aureoboletus betula is just, it is what it is, and you will see it so frequently, it's really easy to learn if you live in the southern US. Okay, so let's get into it. We've already talked about reticulation, so this shagginess on the stem. With a lot of other boletes, reticulation is more of a fine overlay, almost sometimes like a fine spider web or really fine fishnet stockings. But in the case of these two mushrooms I'm showing you, that's very, very shaggy and interlocking. There we go, slightly better focus point. So you also have, as with other boletes, a porous undersurface here. Usually also you have this attractive little sort of rim here, or not rim, but like, it's not quite a full separation, but like you can fairly easily pop the cap right off because there's a little gap there. So the undersurface is porous and lemony yellow, and you can see it's fairly tightly packed. I'm gonna pop it open as well. And you can see that unlike those other two mushrooms I've showed you, it does not stain at all when I open it up. The caps are really variable in color, but they are quite consistent as far as like they can be this sort of orangey red with this yellow rim. This is a very mature specimen that has the streaks of sort of original candy apple red that these mushrooms tend to have when they're immature. But as they get bigger, they sort of become more and more yellow. But what you can see here on this shaggy stem, underneath this yellow shagginess, is this sort of dark reddish stem. And that is also the color of these mushrooms when they're pretty young normally. So here's one actually in that's about as red as they get, and they also are a little bit tacky, sometimes also a little roughened, like a little like rubbing a newt on its head. I love the idea of doing that. I don't get the chance. They move very fast, but still. So this is a really great example of one that I would potentially want to eat. You know, all of these are probably okay. Reason being, like, a lot of boletes do get consumed by bugs, and I'll show you that in a minute. Like, lots of maggot situations that I just take a pass on. But Aureoboletus betula is fairly resistant to bugs, and also the part of it that you want to eat is the stem. Found my knife and ate a piece of bark almost. All right. Little local immunomodulation. Always eat a little dirt because the dirt don't hurt. Don't quote me on that. I guess it possibly could, but it's inevitable at a certain point. Okay, so as I was saying, like, you have sort of a dark reddish stem underneath, and it is a little bit, it's not hollow, but it is a little frail on the inside. Oh, and you can see this one actually does have some insect damage, but it's sort of floofy inside. But if you give it a taste, you know, you can taste and spit mushrooms that you don't intend to eat. That can often be helpful with identification. A lot of times it's not necessary. There's some, like, lots of us mushroom people like to show off, and we're like, well, you can help identify this thing by chewing on it, and not needed in a lot of cases. However, this has a really wonderful sort of soury, you know, citrus flavor. It does sort of roast up nicely, and usually I will remove these shags because they are a little bit particular. But anyway, that's how I handle those. And then I do want to show you, again, if you're like me, I guess I'm a millennial or something. I'm not quite sure. Like, I started my life as a member of Generation X, born in 1981, and then at a certain point the media reassigned me to the millennial generation. But either way, during college there was this wonderful series of videotapes that you could purchase called Girls Gone Wild, and I think I am going to release a series of videotapes myself, VHSs of course, called Boletes Gone Bananas, because it is just a great year for these mushrooms. What I'm pointing at you is one of those mushrooms that is very, very bitter. It isn't dangerous, but you would really not want to eat it. So this is called Tylopilus plumioviolaceus. And I remember that because it has this beautiful sort of streaky plum purpley stem, and it is the violet gray bolete is the common name. And so you know, you have oftentimes by maturity a really dull sort of brown gray mushroom on top. If you look closely, you can see a bit of lilac-y color, but when you flip it over, you have this white, tightly packed porous undersurface. It stains a little bit brownish when you damage it. That's really common with the Tylopilus genus. So they're like not blue, they're brown stainers normally. So anyway, boletes are all over the place. There's so many interesting features to study that help you ID them, but also that makes them just notorious. All right, so the other thing that I really like about this Tylopilus mushroom is how bitter it truly tastes. And so I'm just going to give it a nibble. And unlike the flavor of this really nice sort of sour, this lit up the bitter part of my palate, and that's very common with Tylopilus, plumioviolaceus. Like, I knew what I was getting myself into. But as you can tell, like, a little nibble and spit really doesn't, is not harmful. I don't recommend doing that with toxic mushrooms. Some people do. But I just don't enjoy the idea of risk because, as I mentioned, there aren't a lot of mushrooms that really rely tremendously on their flavor. I want to show you another Tylopilus that is pretty special. So this is Tylopilus Bolete, I believe. I'm in an area where I can't get very good internet, and so if this has been reclassified to a different species or a different genus, I'll find out when I get home. But this is a really fun Tylopilus because most of them are lilac colored and kind of dull, and they have lilac spores. But this one is sort of this bright burnt orange color, and I guess the common name is burnt orange Tylopilus, and it is an edible species, so it's mild. And as you can see, when you damage it, you just get this like furiously brown staining reaction. But I love the fact that it's like just on the total opposite end of the color spectrum as the sort of iconic Tylopilus. Like, if you learn that genus and learn the gestalt of it, and then you walk up on this, you'll be like, I don't know what I'm looking at besides a very interesting member of this blazing hot bolete summer we're having in the south. Okay, let me see. Do I have anything else for you of significance with the boletes? I don't think so, although I am going to cut this Aureoboletus real quick and see how fast it turns blue. Not terribly. And, you can see it coming in, but there are some really interesting ones, especially with red pores underneath, that when you cut them, you can see like the blue oxidization race across the flesh. And because it's yellow, and a lot of boletes are yellow fleshed, it's just dramatic and fun and everything that I want from my summer mushroom haul. Okay, I'm going to finish up with something that I really like to do, which is I am going to smash some Russula mushrooms. If you're not familiar, Russula is an extremely varied and abundant genus. There are hundreds of species. It is a fool's errand to try to identify a lot of them. Many of them are either unclassified, or if you are like me and you're a hobbyist, you simply can't do it by looking at a mushroom in the field. But this is a really fun one because it has this sort of cracked appearance, and this would be considered part of the Russula crustosa species group. And so, it's a group of species that have this sort of cracked cap appearance. They're quite common, and like other Russulas, they're really quite brittle. They're a little bit more robust, and so like a lot of people enjoy eating these because most Russula mushrooms, here's a really classic Russula, like a lot of them, they're just sort of a really classic cap and stem mushroom. Many of them are bright red or purple on top. And then you have white gills and white stem. Often, I'm talking about, this is probably the most generic looking Russula that you could imagine. And they just explode on impact. Like, you can see even tapping on it, these gills are very brittle and they start to fall apart. Whereas this one's a little bit more resilient, which is why people like to eat it. All right, but I really personally enjoy smashing Russulas to show, in fact, like how extremely explodable they are. They're great for mushroom fights. If you ever go out in the woods with me, I promise to at least pre-negotiate the terms of mushroom fights, like whether or not you're interested in such a thing. I'm going to see how well this smashes because, again, you can see it's kind of unusual. I did break it. Oh. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's got bug damage inside, but another distinctive feature for the Russula genus, besides these sort of like brittle bodies, and they're variable in color, but a lot of them are on the red and purple spectrum, they also snap, and they're very brittle on the inside. And so even though this one has been eaten by bugs a good bit, it still snaps open pretty well. But when they're really fresh, it snaps as almost like a carrot stick. It's kind of fun in and of itself. All right, so let's see how my aim is. And okay, so that's more of a splat than an explosion. I've got one more. This one, I think this one's definitely gonna splat. Oh, actually, I don't know if you saw that, but it had a good roll, and it disintegrated. I don't think that it would necessarily have caused much damage if we were in a mushroom fight. However, it would be a good first salvo, I suppose, if I wanted to be threatening. So as you can tell, I am just simply delighted with mushroom season. I'm delighted to share some of these organisms with you because they're just so abundant, edible or no, Tylopilus or exudoporous red-wrinkled flabbergasters. The only thing that I'll say is that I've spent many years collecting mushrooms in this specific place, and there are some of these mushrooms I have never seen here before. And that really, I love that, because it's like there is no such thing as routine on planet Earth. And so I've been, coming to this place multiple times per week for 10 years, more than 10 years. And I have never seen red-wrinkled flabbergasters here until the day before yesterday. And then they grew up, they gutated or developed some beautiful guttation for me and hopefully for you. I hope you have enjoyed them as much as I have. I hope you find a billion mushrooms, and we'll talk again soon.